Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Today on the table I have a Japanese Type 11 light machine gun. In this video I wanted to start off by giving historical context of the firearm to give you guys an idea of its place in Japanese military history. Also, I wanted to go through a point-by-point technical review functionality of the firearm also. In this video I'm not going to be doing any type of shooting, it's just dry technical and historical information. So anyway, if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around, that's coming up now. Okay, if we take a look at the Japanese Type 11, the history here really does paint a pivotal time in Japanese military technology advancement, and would be sort of the beginning of the real modernized type of military equipment that Japan would have. Now, the Japanese Type 11 did come out in 1922, but the history here we could say it really starts back as far as 1867 with the beginning of the Meiji reign. Now, prior to the Meiji reign, the political structure in Japan was very much of a feudal type system. It was based on the shogunate, which was a military type of hierarchical system with the shogun, the landowners, and the samurai at the top, and then you have the farmers and the merchants at the bottom. Now, at the time, we have a huge expansion in the West with Western technology and military equipment, industrialization, and medicine really taking huge evolutionary advances. And you have a lot of political philosophers and scholars in Japan that are starting to take note of this and really get interested in this type of Western technology, Meiji included. The shogun type insulated Japanese system at the time, the heads of the government at the time were not actually really in favor of this Western type of culture permeating into Japan. So you have a clash of really two factions, the Meiji and the shogunate. Now, in 1867, you have the Meiji Restoration, and if you watch the movie The Last Samurai, it's very loosely based on this problem, sort of this clash that's going on, this internal struggle in Japan, and it's somewhat of a civil war. Of course, as the conflict would progress, Meiji, the imperial government, would win, and you have the removal of the old class system of Japan, and you have a now unification and a very imperialistic control. Now, with that, you have the industrialization of Japan. You have advances in technology, advances in industry, and advances in military. And just like any other country in the past, it goes through wide, very quick growth and industrial progression. What do they look to do? They look to expand. So in the 1890s, Japan would actually move over to Korea, where it would clash with China in the first Sino-Japanese War. Now, in this war, Japan would actually come out on top and take over the Korean peninsula as well as the Liaodong Peninsula, which had the Port Arthur port, which was actually a big interest to Russia at the time under Tsar Nicholas. Now, Japan and Russia would get involved in a war called the Russo-Japanese War in about 1904-1905. This war was very pivotal also for the Japanese military outlook because it was the first major war that any country was involved in the early 1900s. During this war, there was also the largest land battle that ever took place in the early 1900s, which was a battle at Mukden between Russia and Japan. And Japan walked away learning a ton about military tactics, military technology of a very large Western country, Russia. Now, after this, of course, Japan would go back and further start developing more advancements in their military technology. So in World War I, Japan is not really involved in any type of real major big-scale military conflict, but what they do have is military attachés going to other countries. And they were at the time witnessing the technological and military advances going on in Europe at the time. One of the big things they noticed was the implementation of the machine gun, which was the first real large-scale war where machine guns were used in any real number. Also, the development of machine gun technology was moving at a very heavy pace. You have Britain with the Lewis gun, you have France with the Hotchkiss, you have the United States later with the BAR, you have Denmark with the Madsen light machine guns, and these attachés would report back to Japan saying, you really show a lot of field superiority when you're able to implement a machine gun into your squad. So what they did is they commissioned Kajiro Nambu to start development on a light machine gun, and what they came up with in 1922 was the Japanese Type 11. Now, it was a derivative of the Hotchkiss design that fed from a Hopper magazine. It was chambered in 6.5 by 55 millimeter, which was the same round that was used in the Japanese Type 38 Arisaka. So infantrymen who were issued the Type 38 could actually issue their feed strips give their feed strips to the machine gunners and keep a constant field of fire as these squads would maneuver in the field. But anyway, that is basically the abridged history on how the Nambu would come into existence. Let's go ahead and bring the camera in closer and go through a technical overview of the machine gun. Okay, first let's go ahead and talk about the mechanics of how the machine gun works. As mentioned, you have a hopper feed device on the left-hand side of the firearm. Because this is obstructing the whole view and this is an oiler here, you have your sights or your rear sight offset here to the right-hand side of the machine gun. The oiler was important because the cartridges obviously did need to be oiled. Now, the open feeding system as well as the oiler on top of the machine gun were two big problems that infantrymen did struggle with keeping the firearm up and running. Now, what would essentially happen is the assistant gunner could open up this is really considered the follower, on the magazine hopper, and as you can see down in here, they could slide 6 5-round stripper clips, giving you 30 rounds of ammunition. Now on this, you might be able to see there is, go the other way, a little bit of damage right here where it looks like this was hit with shrapnel or a bullet. Now this particular machine gun was manufactured in 1940. Production on the Type 11 would stop in 1941, so this is actually one of the last ones that would have been produced, 1922 to 1941, so it did see wide-scale production, but only about 126,000 of these were manufactured. This particular example is all matching, by the way, and it is a transferable machine gun. Anyway, keeping going on, what you have in here is a Hotchkiss style feeding system. So if you can see down there, I'll bring this in a little bit closer, is you have these little teeth, and as the bolt would reciprocate, those, and I'm not going to be able to do this with one hand, but those teeth, see if I can get back here, those teeth would actually move. You see that? And they would pick up rounds from the feed strip and feed them into the machine gun. Now, as the feed strips were expended, they would fall out the back, and this was also a place where jams would occur as well. Now, if you did not put in those feed strips in exactly sort of a right approximate location or placement of those, and you would have one strip fall in after the other, if something were misaligned even slightly, it would lead to a jam, which of course you would need to stop and clear. Now, people would look at this system and think it's very clumsy and awkward, but you have to recall at the time, this was in fact the first light machine gun that was used by Japan. And again, at the time, there were things like the Lewis, the Hotchkiss, the Madsen, which in my opinion, if we took all of those machine gun concepts and laid them out on the table together, this would probably be the last one I would want to take into war. But it was still, as a country which at the time had not seen a lot of Western influence, relatively speaking, this was sort of a from scratch, their own internally manufactured design. It really wasn't bad for the time it was manufactured. Now, other interesting features up here is this is actually the ejector. So as the bolt is to reciprocate, this would reciprocate as well, and as the rounds would be pulled out by the extractor on the bolt, this would turn over, and again I'll kind of simulate that for you, and kick it out of the way. You'll see that moving. See? Right when the bolt hits the peak of its travel, that ejector sticks into the receiver there, and that would kick the round right out to the side. Also, a unique feature about this machine gun is you're going to see the stock is bent off to the side. The reason they did that was for disassembly, and I'll show you that sort of at the end here as well. You're going to notice the barrel itself is shrouded. This is a barrel jacket, actually. The barrel is inside of this. And then all these, extra surface area helps for cooling. And then up at the front as well, this is actually the front of the barrel itself, which goes down into the barrel jacket. And then right here at the front is a gas regulator. And of course you could change the gas setting. Now, gas regulators on machine guns are actually something that were not too common. And this would be one of the first light machine guns to actually implement that type of feature. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at disassembly. You first begin by removing the hopper. I'm just going to pull this out. Now there's a little catch right in here you're going to pull back on, and that will allow the hopper, it's pretty stiff, to slide right out of the receiver. Now taking a look at this, you can see up close those little feed grooves down there. If I push this little camming action bar or actuator on the bottom of the hopper, you can see those grooves moving. There it is from behind. Now as the fifth round is expended, that empty feed strip will drop right back out here, and then allowing the follower to push another one down in its place. Now as it moves forward, it pushes a round from the feed strip into this feedway, where the bolt will come pick it up, put it in the chamber, and fire it. Now, this little block right here actually fits in a camming area on the bolt carrier, which I'll show you in a minute. And as the bolt carrier reciprocates, that's what causes this to cam, pushing rounds in and out of, see if I can push that. There, pushing rounds in and out of that feedway. Moving to the back, I'm gonna actually slide the camera. Again, you can see that bent stock is there to allow clearance for everything to come out of the back here. So start by turning down this lever and pulling it out. It is not captive. Okay, pull off the back plate. Here's your guide rod and recoil spring. And that will allow the bolt and carrier, there we go, go and pull the charging handle off, to come right out the back. Okay, there is the carrier and the gas piston rod. As you can see, there's that little camming track area where that block from the hopper will fit, so it causes it to reciprocate back and forth as it's firing. Here is sort of a falling block action on the bolt itself, and then a little locking wedge here in the back, and the firing pin is right there. Now you can go further by taking off the sort of pistol grip assembly and buttstock. You can also remove the receiver from the barrel jacket. I'm not going to do that, it's pretty simple, but this would be your basic field strip here. Okay, so looking at the Type 11, it was developed in the 11th year of Emperor Taisho's reign, which was 1922. If we look at the Japanese calendar, we take the first year that the current emperor went into power, and the number that's added onto that would be the current calendar year if we're looking at a Western calendar. For example, the date of production of this firearm is 16.6, which is the 16th year of Emperor Hirohito's reign, which began in 1925. So we take 1925 plus 16.6 is the month, so June. 25 plus 16 is 1941. So this was made in June of 1941. So this is one of the last Type 11s that would have actually been manufactured. Now, if we're looking at the interwar period in the early 1930s, about 1933, Japan would cause problems again in Manchuria. So again in Mukden, they would stage the Mukden incident, which was a blowing up of a Japanese railroad, and this would of course have been staged by the Japanese themselves, creating a false flag impetus for Japan to invade Manchuria, which they did. They would then continue on into invading China from there. Now, Manchuria was turned into a puppet state with a provisional government called Manchukuo, which is actually put in place by an old former leader of China itself, as Japan would continue on to moving through China. Now, this was happening in the 1930s. Remember, at the same time, Hitler's in power and begins invading Poland. Now, Japan had left Manchuria wide open for Russian aggression, which was a concern of Japan, but when Russia and Germany would ally in a non-aggression pact, that would basically create the impetus for Japan feeling comfortable moving deeper into China, which they did. Of course, a lot of war atrocities would happen at like Nanking, and there would basically be a huge back and forth between the Chinese and the Japanese prior to the years leading into World War II. Now, of course, the that would have been known as the Second Sino-Japanese War would have been the first major war in which Japan would implement the Type 11 into combat, and it saw a lot of success. It was very unconventional to the Chinese who went up against it, but the Chinese themselves would capture as many of them as they could and then use them against the Japanese as well. There are many variations that these also adapted for flexible mounting in tanks, things like that as well. Now, in 1936, Japan would come out with a new and improved machine gun, which was a much better design, called the Type 96. That was the Type 96 light machine gun, also chambered in 6.5, just like this was, because at the time Japan was still issuing the Type 38. Now, when Japan would get involved in the Pacific theater of operations against the United States after 1941 and the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Japan would continue pushing these into service. Even though in 1941 they would cease production, Japan would go on with full-scale production of the new Nambu Type 96 light machine gun, which of course is better. But it was a country that did need as many firearms and war material as it could get, so it of course kept pushing the Type 11 into service, and it did see service all the way up to Iwo Jima. Now, as the war would progress, Japan would adopt new military technology around the 7.7 Japanese cartridge, which would be more comparable to something like a 30-06 or a 303 or an 8mm, so really more of a full-size rifle cartridge, which was better at longer range shooting, had better penetrating, better ballistic characteristics. And they would adopt new firearms to go along with them, like the Japanese 99 light machine gun, which looked just like the Type 96 but developed for the 7.7 round, and the Japanese Type 99 rifle, which was also chambered for the same round. Now, this would create a lot of logistics in the Japanese military during World War II, because you have a series of machine guns in 6.5, you have a series of rifles in 6.5, you have a series of machine guns in 7.7, you have a series of rifles in 7.7. You also have the 8mm non-boot pistol round, the 7mm non-boot pistol round. You have the 7.7 semi-rimmed, the 7.7 rimmed, because of things like the Type 92 machine guns, which were a derivative of the Lewis, the Type 92 heavy machine guns, which were another derivative of the Hotchkiss design. So you had all these different firearms all over the place, all needing different types of ammunition, which created a logistical nightmare for the Japanese. But anyway, the story of the Type 11 would basically cease in 1945, and it really never saw any military combat beyond that. So it did have a service life really 22 to 1945, and it is really a pivotal piece of technology for Japanese war expansionism and military technology. So really it all started right here with this machine gun. A really cool piece of history, and I love, of course, being able to take a look at it and share it with you guys. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys on this, and I'm going to leave you off there. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Also consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that bell notification button so you are aware when I am posting new content. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave you off there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.